We are so happy to have Kelly Drennan joining us today to talk about the Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary. And Kelly, good morning.
Good morning, Tom.
You guys have a landmark anniversary coming up, much like the Tennessee Aquarium. We're both celebrating 30 years this year, 2022.
That's right. And we are so excited. Sanctuary's been around the area's been around a long time, but it's been a sanctuary for 30 years now. And it's gone through so many changes, and we've had so many opportunities to get out there and explore this wonderful part of the ocean that we're just really glad to be able to share that with y'all.
If you would back up just a second for everyone and just tell us about the Marine Sanctuary Program and how many different units there are. I think when I first started with the aquarium, there were 12 marine sanctuaries, and I know there are more now.
That's right. There are either 15 or 16 marine sanctuaries now. We've had some recent changes, and I'm losing track of the number, but 15 marine sanctuaries and 2 marine national monuments. They're all managed under NOAA's program for the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. And what that means is these are ocean places similar to national parks, but underwater, that are managed and protected for the preservation of the resources there, which might be wildlife, might be particular habitats, and it can even be for cultural resources like shipwrecks. So the very first sanctuary that was established was actually for the USS Monitor, the ironclad shipwreck from the Civil War. And that's off the coast of North Carolina. So that was our very first one. The National Marine Sanctuary Program itself started in 1972. So this is its 50th year that we're coming into right now. And the Monitor was the first one. I believe it was 1975. And since then, we've added sanctuary after sanctuary after sanctuary. There have been some big gaps in the designation process over time, as kind of there was a pause put on by Congress, and then kind of reinvigorated a few years ago with a new nomination process and so forth. But we've got new sanctuaries coming online pretty regularly right now.
And if anybody ever ends up on Jeopardy and this ends up being a question, there's actually one freshwater marine sanctuary.
Oh no, there are 2 now.
Are there 2 now? Okay, great.
There are 2. That's one of the new ones. Yeah, so Thunder Bay up in I want to say that's Lake Huron off of Michigan. That protects a variety of freshwater shipwrecks. And then the newest one is Wisconsin Shipwreck Coast. And I'll be honest, I don't remember which Great Lake that's in, but it's to the west of Thunder Bay. So we've
probably
got 2,
Michigan, yeah.
Yeah, we've got 2 Great Lakes sanctuaries now, and a third one in the nomination process over to the east in Lake Ontario.
Oh, outstanding. Yeah, so there's a lot of really interesting habitats, but unlike the national park system where millions and millions of people actually go to visit, the Marine Sanctuary Program is sort of limited to those folks who are certified scuba divers and who can get wet and get under the seas. But you guys have a number of ways that you've taken folks on virtual trips through ROVs and educational programs that have reached literally millions of kids over the years. And we've been proud partners to bring some of those students from the Chattanooga area into some of those virtual situations just a couple of years ago, as a matter of fact.
That's right. A couple of years ago, we managed to get technology on board our own research vessel that will allow for satellite link-ups and live broadcasts, which is kind of amazing because our sanctuary is over 100 miles offshore. And that's one of the challenges we have of bringing it to the people, because getting that link back to land from that far out is expensive and technologically challenging. And so that was a grand experiment. Could we do it on our smaller research vessel rather than a great big NOAA ship? And our vessel at 85 feet was able to accomplish it with the help of the Global Foundation for Ocean Exploration. And what they did was put an ROV in the water and have technicians on board to make sure that signal from the ROV was getting up to the satellites and out to places like Tennessee Aquarium, and allowing people to see the coral spawning as it was happening out there on the reefs. And this wasn't just the regular coral spawning at the Flower Garden Banks at the shallow part where scuba divers can go and see it in person. This was down deeper. This was below 130 feet in parts where we'd never had the chance to observe the coral spawning before. So it was a kind of first for us, as well as a chance to bring that experience, that underwater snowstorm, live to the public there at the Tennessee Aquarium.
You know, I'm old enough to remember some of the Jacques Cousteau specials. And, you know, one of the things that the Cousteau adventures and all of the media coverage that he brought to oceans really let us know that these places like the Flower Garden Banks aren't common. In fact, they're the rarity, those vast parts of the ocean that really are sort of devoid of life. There are different creatures that are there, but these sanctuaries, these coral reef systems, are pockets and oasis of life in the middle of, relatively nothing going on the ocean bottom. So speak to that a little bit about the creatures that you see inhabiting the Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary.
I like how you described them as oases of life. There was actually one of our advisory council members and a longtime volunteer at the sanctuary. He writes and publishes in scuba magazines and things regularly. And he actually described it as magic in the middle of nowhere. And I thought that just stuck with me for years now, because that's what it is. So you're out there on the continental shelf, heading out towards the big drop off, and you're right out there on the edge. And instead of it being 400 or 500 feet deep, like you'd expect it to be there, all of a sudden there's this shallow spot where at 55 feet, there's a coral reef. And that's because there's these little thrust up underwater mountains. And these reefs that we have out there are perched right on top of those. So East Flower Garden Bank and West Flower Garden Bank have these beautiful, healthy, thriving coral reefs in a place nobody expected to find them. Fishermen identified them as being coral reefs out there back at the early 1900s. They were catching snapper and grouper and things out there, but scientists really doubted their verification of reefs. They thought, that's just not right. That's too far north for there to be coral reefs out there. And so they actually went exploring in the 1960s. Scientists from the Houston Museum of Natural Science and volunteer divers from the Navy and other places. And they went out on Navy vessels and they're like, let's go see what's really out there. And they found these pristine reefs. The wildlife out there is a little bit of the Caribbean. It's not everything you're going to find everywhere else in the Caribbean, but a subset, very healthy and balanced subset. We have Manta Rays is probably our iconic creature out there that people love to see. I've had very close encounters with them. I had them close that, the tip of the wing went this close to my mask, right by my face as it swam by. They're just beautiful, graceful, amazing animals. And in recent years, we've identified that not only do we have lots of mantas out there, but they seem to be juveniles for the most part. And so we believe this is a manta nursery area around the Flower Garden Banks. Of course, you're going to see your typical brightly colored reef fish that you'd expect to find on a coral reef, the brilliant parrotfish and damselfish and angelfish and things like that. And we have a couple of kind of unique species to the flower gardens too. We have one that's called a golden smooth trunkfish. It's actually a triangular fish. You look at it face on, it's like looking at a triangle. It's a type of boxfish. And it's found throughout the Caribbean and it's black with white spots. But the flower garden, we also have a slightly different version that's actually gold with white spots. And we're one of only 2 places in the world that's ever been seen. And we also have a tiny little fish at full size. It's no bigger than about 6 inches, called the Mardi Gras wrasse, because it has beautiful purple, green, and gold colors. And in fact, that was a new species to science just in the 21st century. It was first observed in 1997, and then all the scientific, inspection of it happened in the 2000s. And the paper that proved it was a new species and actually gave it a name came out in 2007. So, there's stuff that's been there forever, and then there's new stuff we're discovering all the time.
So, the aquarium's mission has always been to kind of lead people on this journey from the mountains to the sea. And so when the Ocean Journey building was first conceived prior to its opening in 2005, the idea was, let's showcase what's at the end of the pipeline here from the Tennessee River. Tennessee River connects with the Ohio to the Mississippi to the Gulf of Mexico. So we always try to impress upon people that if we're doing a good job taking care of the water here at home, that's good for us. It's our source of drinking water. It's our playground. It's where a lot of really interesting aquatic animals live, but it's also connected to the Gulf of Mexico and the Flower Garden Bank. So talk to us a little bit about the importance of having the partnership that we do with NOAA and the Flower Garden Banks and showcasing this very special place in the Gulf of Mexico within the Ocean Journey building.
Well, the partnership actually goes back to before my time with the sanctuary. But right when I came on board with the sanctuary, they were already well into the planning process, and a group from up there, including yourself, came down and visited the Flower Garden Banks. They came down to our offices in 2004. a team of the biologists that take care of the aquariums and the educators that talk about them and teach about them. And they came down and learned and had an in-depth workshop with us about the sanctuary. And then we all went diving together out there in the sanctuary, because we wanted Tennessee Aquarium to have the best possible understanding of this place before they went into the construction of this fantastic exhibit, the Secret Reef. And so our partnership goes way back to before the reef was built, Secret Reef was built, and turned it into a wonderful replica of the flower garden banks. I can't tell you how good a replica it is. It really looks like the flower garden banks. And in fact, I've seen it from both outside and inside the aquarium. If you remember, Tom, one of my visits there to do additional outreach, I actually dove in there as a dive.
We put you to work.
We put me to work. That's right. I was in there cleaning and scrubbing and attracting sharks. Apparently, they were following me around the tank. But yeah, it is a wonderful exhibit. It felt like, being back in the flower gardens there, right in the middle of Tennessee. So our partnership goes way back. Now, in more recent times, we've kind of paired up into a really formalized aquarium sanctuary partnership through the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. And through this, we've provided some funding to the Tennessee Aquarium. And in exchange, we are collaborating on a variety of things. You all are working on rearing fish that are species found at the flower garden banks that are actually hatching on their own in your Secret Reef, the flower garden banks exhibit. And seeing what you can do about that to help, get rid of the need maybe to get some of these species from the wild to help people understand more about them. And if necessary in the future, to repopulate.
I've always found it really exciting to hear people like yourself and some of our volunteer divers that have been to the flower garden banks and have been diving in the Secret Reef exhibit in the Ocean Journey building. And when they come out of the water, they're like, wow, it's just like being there. And I think that's really something that people need to appreciate and understand, that you are seeing a habitat that you may never, actually venture out into the Gulf of Mexico and see for yourself. And you have an opportunity to have that experience by, going through that exhibit and really taking the time to observe the animal behavior. Because as you noted, these animals are doing everything that they do in the wild and reproducing in the Secret Reef exhibit. So, unlike national parks, this is really an opportunity to go beneath the water surface and safely explore a place that many people will never see.
Yeah, another thing that's different about us in national parks is, there's a gate. When you've entered a national park. There's usually a big sign and a park ranger maybe, or a little gift shop or a visitor center. With a national marine sanctuary, that is not always the case, especially with our offshore sites. You could go through it and never know you were there. There's not really a good place to put up a sign 100 miles offshore. People sometimes know they're in the flower gardens because they'll see the mooring buoys we've placed out there. And we actually have the sanctuary name on the mooring buoys. And those are there so people can tie off without dropping anchor on the reef. But we don't have that many of them. So unless you pass by that particular part, you might never even know you were in the National Marine Sanctuary. And so people have to be a little more intentional sometimes about visiting a National Marine Sanctuary than they do about a national park. But the added advantage is no admission fees.
Yeah, that's true. One of the other things that we found during the height of the pandemic was, because we had the Secret Reef live webcam out there on our website, people literally from all over the world were coming and watching that and taking kind of stress breaks while they're watching the colorful reef fish and the green sea turtle and the sharks swimming around. And I think hopefully we imparted a little bit of knowledge about the Gulf of Mexico and about the flower garden banks, and giving people the opportunity to see this exhibit and kind of better understand what's out there without actually having to have traveled to either Chattanooga or the Houston, Galveston area to take a boat ride out to the Gulf of Mexico.
That's right. And one of the beauties of partnering with the Tennessee Aquarium is that we are getting this message of we all live upstream of something important, right there to Middle America, where it needs to be. It's not just people on the coast who are affecting what's happening in the ocean today. As you mentioned, there's that whole branching of river to river to river to sea that affects the Gulf of Mexico. And in fact, the Mississippi River, drains a really huge portion of the United States. 2/3 of the United States overall drains into the Gulf. And the biggest part of that is the Mississippi River. So everything that can happen in Chattanooga, that can happen anywhere else upstream, is important to what happens in the ocean. So being conscientious about what flows off the streets and into the drains and down into the rivers and all those other kind of things, you guys are sharing that message for us right there in the middle of Tennessee and helping everybody understand what's at stake down the line.
Well, we're excited because one of our 30th anniversary events is coming up in March, and we will be launching Ocean Odyssey 3D, a new IMAX film at the Tennessee Aquarium IMAX 3D Theater. We're very fortunate because Dr. Sylvia Earle has accepted an invitation to speak at the premiere event of that. And as you know, Dr. Earle has designated the Gulf of Mexico as one of her hope spots because of the kinds of things like the flower garden banks that have been going on there to protect the animals and the habitats out there.
Yeah, Sylvia's actually been to the flower garden banks several times. And back in the early 2000s, she explored in a submersible out there, a one-person submersible, and was out there as part of the Sustainable Seas expedition. She also christened our research vessel back in 2008. That's the RV Manta. So yeah, Sylvia's got great connections to the sanctuary. She's a great speaker. I think you'll really enjoy that 30th anniversary celebration.
Is there anything else about the flower garden banks that you want to pass along before we wrap things up here today?
I think that people just need to understand that there is more to the ocean than you can initially see when you go to the beach. Here in Texas, if you go to the beach in Galveston near our offices, you see kind of brown, muddy water, and that's just a lot of sediment coming from the Mississippi River as it wraps around the Texas coastline. And you don't think Caribbean and beautiful and coral reefs. But 30 miles out, the Gulf of Mexico is crystal clear. It all has to do with currents and sediments and river flows and all those things that make people miss out on what is actually out there. And so part of what you guys are doing, part of what we're doing is trying to bring that magic back to the land and help people understand what phenomenal places are out there in our ocean. Even if you never visit them, these are important places. Coral reefs are home to 25% of the marine life out there, even though they only occupy a few percent of the overall habitat in the entire ocean. And so they're really important ecosystems, whether you visit them or not. They are important to our fisheries. They're important to our recreation. And in most cases, not the case of the flower garden banks, but in most cases, they're important to the protection of our coastlines. So it's important to understand ocean places, even if you can't get to them in person. But places like Tennessee Aquarium do such a great job to kind of bring that home to people.
Recently, the flower garden banks was expanded. I think that was just last year, the year before?
Yeah, it was just actually January 19th last year. So almost on our anniversary. We started out as a sanctuary in 1992 with just East and West Flower Garden Bank. And that's where these beautiful coral reefs are perched on top of these little underwater mountains. In 1996, Congress added Stetson Bank on, and it's another nearby salt dome structure under the water, but not with a true coral reef on top of some corals, but a lot of algae and sponges, but a lot of the same Caribbean wildlife, the beautiful tropical fishes and sharks and rays and all this wonderful stuff. So that was the sanctuary for a long time. When I came on board, that was the whole sanctuary, those 3 banks. But shortly after I came on board, there was expanded looks at other banks, reefs and banks in the region, going out along the continental shelf past Louisiana. And what we discovered is that these things are all interconnected. They're geologically connected if you look at the contours of the seafloor. They're biologically connected if you look at the varieties of wildlife that are there. And these fantastic mesophotic habitats, the deep habitats around each of these banks, are very similar. And what we discovered is that some of these didn't have enough protection and they were being somewhat damaged by other activities going on in the Gulf, and that maybe they deserve the same kind of protections as the flower garden banks and Stetson Bank. So since 2005, I guess we started talking about it, moving forward. A formal recommendation came out of our advisory council, and I want to say 2007, 2008. And then it just kept moving forward from there. It was part of our management plan to go through expansion. And after years and years and years of environmental impact statements and public comment periods, we finally added 14 reefs and banks to the sanctuary effective January 2021. So this will be the 1-year anniversary of that expansion coming up. And we're really excited that the sanctuary is now 17 different reefs and banks. There are some other coral communities and coral reefs similar to Stetson Bank, and not quite as populated as East and West Flower Garden Bank, but also with some pretty good quantity of coral out at McGrail Bank and some other unique features. And then all this wonderful mesophotic habitat with all these deep corals and other fantastic stuff that we explore with remotely operated vehicles. So there's so much on the horizon for the sanctuary. We look forward to bringing more and more of this out there to the public.
We have so many people from this area that love to go to Florida, that love to go to the Gulf Coast and enjoy looking out over the ocean. So many beautiful sunrise and sunset pictures are shared on social media every year, and the different creatures that are crawling around on the beaches. And I think that they should appreciate the work that you and your team and NOAA is doing to make sure that there is a healthy Gulf of Mexico. And there are wonderful sea creatures that are out below the waves that you can see at the Tennessee Aquarium. And if you have the chance to have an underwater adventure with the scuba out there in the Gulf of Mexico, please do. And thanks again to you and your team for all the work that you do, and thanks for the partnership with the Tennessee Aquarium. We've certainly had a long tradition of doing some really exciting things, and I know that in our next 30 years together, there's much more to come.
That's right. It's really been a great relationship. I love my opportunities to come visit at the aquarium and do outreach with your visitors, even if it's remotely. I just love the opportunity to see your place. It is just a phenomenal place to visit and a great representation of the flower garden banks.
Well, let's hope you can do so in 2022.
That would be great.
Thanks, Kelly.
You're welcome.